Well, welcome everybody. This is John Palmer, Dutch Like Speed Selling. This is the Raging Verbalist number 275 for those of you keeping track. If you've been here before, glad to have you back. Always wonderful if you're brand new. Talk about anything that enrages me. So there's lots of things to talk about. Usually don't veer off too much in politics, but today, well, we're going to be drifting a little bit into that. So, just bear with it. You can always catch us on YouTube every week, and also our Facebook group, which is the Position to Win book, Position to Win book. And away you go. Now, of course, the person who's going to ply me with the questions that you would be asking if you were sitting there, but of course, it would make her house pretty crowded. But anyway, here she is, the ever lovely Sandra. Sandra, welcome.
Hello, how are you doing?
Doing well. It's been one of those kind of crazy days, but it's good to see you, and it's good to get this going.
That's right, that's right. So with that rage energy,
Mm,
we're
yeah.
talking about the hazards of negotiating in public. So how would you define negotiating in public?
Well, most negotiations, almost all negotiations, are done, in behind the door, so to speak. In a closed room, and you hash out a deal, you work it out, you do what you have to do, and that's what happens. But when you get to trying to do it in public, it just gets a little bit crazy because there are so many people who have virtually no understanding of what it means to negotiate, how to negotiate. They've, maybe they've watched it on television, or they've watched a movie, or they've heard some commentators talk about, well, this is why did they do this and why did they do that? So yeah, negotiating in public is like a bad idea. And what it means is that you got a lot of people who are going to be watching and being commentators and being what are called kibitzers, which are as a phrase from playing poker. We'd have people sitting in behind you going, "Ooh, I would have done that." Yeah, yeah. Well, you don't have any money in it either, so yeah. So that's that. Negotiating in public is invites everybody to have an opinion, even though they have no skin in the game.
So is Donald Trump negotiating in public?
Well, he is. For people talking about how secretive things are going to be, but for this whole tariff situation, Donald Trump is out negotiating in public, and this is what people have been saying. No backroom deals. We want to see it out in the open. We want to see that. Well, that seems to be actually the opposite of the reaction that I'm observing, which is people are freaking out. They're like, "What? He's doing what? He said what?" And you can see this all over the place. Now, understand that when you're negotiating and you're talking to people, you can say all kinds of things that may not be in the final deal. In fact, a lot of things aren't put in the final deal because this is how you start and this is where you go. So, yeah, Donald Trump right now is negotiating in public, and it is a wild thing to watch because the number of people from every single quarter of the political spectrum has advice for him. But of course, I don't think that they really understand what's really going on.
And what lessons can be learned from watching this global negotiation taking place?
Well, instead of the mamby-pamby, I think it's a good question. Instead of the mamby-pamby bullshit that you see typically, you know, especially people who are writing about this, and they show very simplistic negotiations. They show all of these concessions being made. There's no fighting back and forth because let's face it, if you have a television show, if you have a movie, if you have something, you only have so many seconds to actually show this. Negotiations are usually slow and deliberate and painful. And they're painful because you have two sides that both want something, they both need each other, but that doesn't mean that you can get to that end result. In fact, I've seen people make this mistake when they get in negotiations and they say, well, look, you're going to compromise here and I'm going to compromise here. So why don't we just cut to the chase and get to the end? Usually that's a really bad idea. So I think that what we're seeing is we're seeing it happen out in the open, and you can learn a lot because this is the way it looks. And by the way, anything that makes you uncomfortable is probably another lesson, because I have seen lots of people who are really tough at the bar, so to speak. And then when they get out to the real negotiations, they fold up and they are just a bundle of nerves. They lose their shit.
And what advice would you give to the panicked naysayers?
First thing I would say is that none of you have clearly been in any kind of tough or real world or high level negotiations. Negotiating a price on a Christmas tree or trying to get a better deal on something trivial. It doesn't qualify you as really being able to sit at the adult table, so to speak. So my suggestion to all of these people who are out there who are saying, how come this hasn't been fixed by now? Negotiations take as long as they take. We go through as many steps as we have to go through. Oftentimes, you'll find how a deal comes together at that last moment. And that last moment is when we finally hit that point where everybody goes, okay, I can step this way, you can step this way. And we find that compromise point where people say, yes, we'll do the deal. And that's how it's going to happen. So for all you naysayers, maybe go buy some Depends diapers, a big giant bottle of, antacid of some kind, and sit back and just kind of watch. But more importantly, if you're in business, you should learn by watching what's going on.
And is there a movie, television show, or song that excuse me, that
Choked you up, didn't it? Huh?
exactly, it's such an intense conversation. So, that depicted negotiations that were absolutely absurd or wrong.
Well, there's lots of examples. The one that I always point to is the movie Wall Street, and the movie Wall Street had, had lots of interesting stuff in it and all of that. But the problem is that in the end, of course, the good guys win. They've broken the evil, greedy guy. Now, as a shareholder of that fictitious company, here's what comes down to. I want the best possible price that I can get for my shares because I've been hanging on to this thing for who knows how long and all that. But of course, the way it gets maneuvered is that everybody ends up with this kind of a happy place and you're taking less money. All I can tell you, having worked on a lot of different deals, is that nobody sits there and goes, well, I feel wonderful, but I'm poorer financially. Usually people want the more money and they can kind of placate themselves. The other one that drove me crazy, and I mean, as a youth, I heard this, is that the British rock group, The Who, had Magic Bus. And here they're trying to negotiate for a magic bus. Now, I mean, if it's a magic bus, you should be willing to pay a lot of dough for it. But they're negotiating over trivial stuff. So even when I heard it, I went, you got to be kidding me. You just, pay the piper and be done with this thing. I mean, you're negotiating over, you know, 10 pounds or something. I mean, come on. I mean, just the magic part alone should command a premium. So that was an example of a really silly one. Now, if you're out there saying, well, John, I really want to get better at all of these kinds of skills, I want to learn how to do these things in a smarter, stronger, better way. Well, I have a remedy. I have a cure. I have something that will help you get there, which is go out and get my book. My book, as most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes, it just takes them 3 to 5 years to realize it. Position to Win, available physically from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, any place that they sell books, they can actually order this thing. Or you can go to our website, which is positiontowinbook.com, positionwinbook.com, and get it. And there you go. Look at that real physical book. I will sign it, autograph it, and get it back to you. Also, you can pick it up with digital copies from Kindle, Nook, and Apple iBooks. And then if you want to learn how to do what we're doing now, which is communicate remotely, so you don't end up on the, well, geez, how come this isn't working very well? Go pick up Remote Work for a Better World exclusively on the Amazon Kindle store. And then, of course, if you want to have a little bit of rage in your life every day, you want to go out there and do it, something's happening, go get yourself a Raging Verbalist mug. Look at that. That thing is ready to go, and you can get serious about what's going to happen in your life. All right, Sandra, what's next?
All right, so what prevents someone from being a better negotiator?
Number one mistake that I see, absolutely number one mistake that everybody makes is what I call is the time pressure. They put themselves under time pressure. I always like finding out what people's time horizons are. Maybe they've said, we got to do this or we got to do that, and we've got to get it done by a certain time. Or if we don't get it done, what's going to happen? And then you have to start working that angle. So if I'm negotiating against somebody, I want to find out what their deadlines are. Maybe they've promised to be able to get the deal done. Maybe they've said this is going to happen. See, I like to open negotiations and find out how I can, run the clock and make sure that I don't have to worry about anybody. Okay, if I put pressure on them, what are they going to do? And the example that I'll give is that I was sitting there doing a negotiation and we were working our way through some things. And lo and behold, the guy said, well, you have a flight to catch, don't you? And I said, well, no, not really. Now, the person I was with, my sales guy, freaked out because he's like, John, we're not going to make the flight. I had to take him outside, take a tire iron out of the rental car and whack him in the head and say, we're going to stay here until we get the deal done. Now we did, we got the deal done. Never let that time pressure get you, because usually it's the pressure that we put on ourselves and not with the pressure from the outside. They're going to try, but you have your own demons, and that's usually the number one problem and number one mistake.
And is there a shocker negotiation that you've seen with Donald Trump?
It is astonishing to watch Zelensky from the Ukraine show up in the White House. And the way I look at it is he showed up, he's wearing what he wears. I got it. He's got a certain style, and he's got his gym bag so he can get filled with all those, George Washingtons or those Ben Franklins probably. And he shows up and he's doing this negotiation in public with Donald Trump and JD Vance. And these guys are like, they're tag teaming them. I mean, it's like, should have been like a UFC or WWE or something. And they're literally just tearing them apart, telling them, listen, you can say whatever you want to say, but understand you don't have the cards to play this game the way you're trying to play it. And the game has changed from the way you were being handled before. To me, that was an acute example. Anybody who's out there, I know maybe maybe you have TDS or something, and it would bug you. But I'm going to tell you right now, make sure that you go watch that video and watch it more than once, because you never want to be in Zelensky's position. Because wow, talk about being on the back foot. That was not pretty. That was rather ugly. I didn't necessarily cheer that he was going through that pain, but it is a good example of somebody who showed up to a negotiation and had no idea what they were stepping into.
And why does it seem that Trump can be on all sides of an issue in the tariff negotiation?
His mindset, from what I can tell and from my research, is that there's a white paper that talks about what they call the Great Reset. And the Great Reset is all about how to reset tariffs. See, the tariff structure we have in place is like coming up on 70 something years, maybe even 80 years old, because it took place after World War II and was put in place. It's been kind of babied and tinkered with here and there. And Trump looks at it and says, hey, there's a chance to do a great reset. And I'm going to just do a great reset with everybody. Now, anybody that knows about how these big things happen, that is potentially very high risk. And so he decided, I'm going to do the big reset and see what's going to happen, and then I can be fleet of foot and get this thing figured out and done. Now, the point about being on all sides is that if you don't understand the other side, if you don't understand how your adversary, maybe not even an adversary, if you don't understand how people work and their requirements, what happens is that you end up not being able to get the best deal you possibly can. Now, his goal was to do the reset. I also believe that it was to do the following, which is to drive a wedge between China and the rest of the world and stop having to worry about, well, okay, well, yeah, maybe, maybe we ought to treat these guys nicer or do this or do that. Now, that wedge was done previously. In fact, Henry Kissinger went to China in the 1970s at the behest of Richard Nixon, and his goal was to peel China away from the Soviet Union, which they did, and that created a real fissure in that whole block that existed there. Well, we're seeing a different version of it. Now, instead of it taking weeks, months, or years, Donald Trump is down to minutes, hours, and days. Now, that creates a lot of upset, though, because usually this stuff takes a long time and he wants to do it right now.
And why is he pushing so hard on China?
Donald Trump in his first term said that China was the big target as far as negotiating. And he sent a team of negotiators over. They spent 2 years negotiating a deal. They put in restrictions on IP and how to deal with IP theft. And they talked about how to make sure that was fairer and more balanced trade, that you could actually sell things back and forth. And they put that together. It took them 2 years to do it. I mean, think about it, 2 years to put that together. Now, I've been on negotiations that have taken, like, my longest is about 30 months. Not fun because it doesn't feel like you're making progress. Now, what happened is that COVID took place. And as soon as COVID took place, the Chinese government basically said, well, we're going to abrogate, well, we're going to put a pause on the whole thing. Again, they don't ever say we're tossing it out. They say, well, we'll put a pause on it because of COVID. We really can't put this in place. It's a little too restrictive because we have to deal with COVID. And well, lo and behold, they started dealing with COVID and they put it on pause. Well, COVID's been over for what, 2-3 years now. Biden administration did not follow through and say, okay, now we go back to this agreement, because it was almost like it was neglected. Donald Trump, having seen that behavior, of course, steps up and says, well, we're going to have to put some pressure and put some heat on them. And we're not going to wait 2 years to figure this out. We're going to do it right now. When you have an other party who can outlast you, outslow you, as I like to call it, then you have to figure out a way to put maximum pressure, which is why he's doing that right now.
And what is your advice to entrepreneurs, business owners, marketing and salespeople regarding negotiating?
Couple things. So the first one is never, ever, 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 ever negotiate in public, because you know all your other stakeholders will look at it, and it will freak them out, and it will make them very nervous and crazy and say, wait a second, how come we're doing X, Y, and Z, and why aren't we doing this or that? The second thing is, so don't negotiate in public. The second thing is that negotiations start as soon as you start to engage with somebody. So many people who are in the marketing and sales side believes that negotiations is a discrete activity that takes place kind of in a bubble, in a vacuum. Well, now we're going to get to negotiations. Negotiations have been going on from the first time that you ever touched somebody, talked to somebody, met with somebody, did anything with them. You're always in the process of doing that negotiation. Now, that is different than the advocacy that takes place when we're doing marketing and sales, but it is a parallel track that is taking place, because all deals happen in the context of a negotiation where people agree and come to a resting point, a compromise point where they're actually going to do the deal itself. This is why negotiations need to be handled successfully and professionally, and not ad hoc. If you have somebody who's a lousy negotiator, you may have them start up the conversation, but at some point in time, you're going to have to remove them. And the third and final thing is you have to keep reminding yourself of the time pressures that you put on yourself and the time pressures that are being put on the other side. And more importantly, the context of the world that we live in at this point in time. And if you do those three things, I think you'll find out you'll become a stronger and better negotiator. So for myself, John Paul Mendoza, Dr. Spade Selling, this has been Raging Verbalist number 275. And of course, the ever lovely Sandra. We'll see you next week on the Raging Verbalist. And make sure that you negotiate, and negotiate harder and better, but make sure that you always give room so you can always compromise to make a deal. And there's always a way to get a deal done. Thanks.